What if everything we call the beginning was only a faint echo of something far older, something buried beneath the silence of our own origins? If civilization did not rise from chaos, but rather re-emerged from the ashes of a world drowned in its own memory? Before we wander further, take a deep breath. Let the world outside your room fade for a moment. Because tonight, we are not chasing facts, only the quiet pulse of forgotten time. So before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what we explore here. And while you're listening, tell me in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is where you are now. I want to know the place now where these ancient whispers reach you. Long before the first line of human history was written, the earth held its breath. In the deep layers of soil and stone there are clues, marks, fragments, and alignments that speak of hands that shaped the world when glaciers still walked across the continents. Yet, according to the story we're told, civilization began only 6,000 years ago, somewhere between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Everything before that, they say, was darkness, a time of hunters, of nomads, of scattered tribes. But beneath that neat timeline, the ground hums with contradictions. A block of diorite polished like glass in Egypt, a platform of stone in Lebanon weighing more than a modern locomotive, a wall in Bolivia cut so cleanly it defies even our diamond tools. They do not belong to the world of primitive man. They whisper of geometry, of measurement, of a precision so intimate it borders on reverence. And across the myths of every culture, from the flood of Gilgamesh to the deluge of Deucalion, from Manu's ship in India to the Ark of Noah, there runs the same trembling chord: the world before was drowned. But who built that world? And why did they vanish so completely that we only find them in the reflections of stories told by survivors? Archaeologists hesitate. Historians adjust the light to fit the frame. Yet, the evidence persists. Göbekli Tepe rises from the hills of Anatolia, its stones aligned with the stars, its carvings older than agriculture itself. It should not exist, and yet it does. Standing as the first temple, or perhaps the last monument of a people who remembered the sky in ways we have forgotten. Imagine a dawn where stone circles hummed with meaning, where hands carved lions and vultures not for worship, but for memory. Where the earth was not yet divided into nations, and knowledge was carried like a flame through migration, loss, and rebirth. The flood then was not only a punishment or a storm, it was a veil, a cleansing tide that erased names, cities, and songs, leaving behind only the bones of mountains and the murmurs of myths. Some say the flood came from melting ice, a sudden rupture in the climate that drowned coastal plains and scattered early peoples. Others whisper that it was a cosmic event, a comet or a pulse from the heavens that shook the oceans free. The Younger Dryas boundary, the layer of platinum and black glass found across continents, marks something catastrophic around 12 to 800 years ago. Something burned, something fell, and afterward, silence. A long, cold silence from which the human story began again, rewritten as if nothing had existed before. But what if the survivors of that lost world seeded the myths we now mistake for imagination? What if the gods of Sumer, Egypt, and Mesoamerica were only memories of those who built the old world, remembered through fragments of speech and symbol? Their stories always begin the same way. Beings of knowledge descending after the waters receded, teaching humanity how to measure the land, plant the seed, read the stars. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians called them the Shining Ones. The Maya, the bearded teachers. Across oceans and millennia, they return like a recurring dream. Yet dreams fade when they are written down. Over time, myth hardens into theology, and the living pulse of memory becomes dogma. The flood, once a global trauma, becomes a single regional tale. The builders, once real, become celestial. and the ruins left behind, too vast, too ancient, are explained away as coincidence, or as the work of simple hands guided by superstition. But if you listen closely beneath the noise of certainty, there's still that quiet vibration, like a frequency carried through stone. We live surrounded by the remnants of a world that should not exist. Granite that resists erosion for 12,000 years still bears tool marks. Caves deep in France hold images of animals that vanished long before our recorded past. And in the ocean depths, sonar reveals geometric forms, terraces, roads, and towers buried under layers of coral and silt. Perhaps they're natural, perhaps not. The sea hides its secrets well. In the hush between waves, the mind begins to wonder. If a civilization could rise before the last ice age, how far could it have reached? What language would it speak? Would it measure time by the stars or by the heartbeat of the earth? Maybe the very rhythm of our myths, creation, flood, rebirth, comes from that ancient cycle, echoing across ages like the breath of something vast and unfinished. There is no need to believe, only to feel that quiet dissonance between what we are told and what the stones seem to remember. For history is not a book, it's a palimpsest, a page written, erased, and written again, each layer faintly visible beneath the next. We are reading it backward, mistaking the most recent ink for the beginning of the story. And perhaps in some forgotten archive of stone and silence, the true first chapter of civilization still waits to be uncovered, not in the ruins of Mesopotamia, but in the deeper layers where myth and geology meet. When the first dawn broke over that world before the flood, maybe they too looked at the rising sun and wondered if they were the first or merely the last. There are moments in history that do not fit anywhere. They drift like fragments of a dream, too precise to be fantasy, too ancient to be explained. Among them are maps, faded, fragile pieces of parchment that whisper of coastlines not yet discovered, and continents drawn with an accuracy that should have been impossible for the time. They're not just old maps, they're echoes of memory, of a geography known before the sea swallowed the world that came before. The most haunting of these is the Peri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed he'd compiled it from even older charts. It shows the coasts of South America long before anyone had officially mapped them, and beneath that, strangest of all, a frozen outline of Antarctica, free of ice. But how could such precision exist before modern navigation, before the compass was trusted, before anyone could even imagine a polar continent? The lines of latitude, the exact curvature of the Earth, those belong to a later age, to a science yet unborn. And yet, there it is, in ink and animal hide, silent but undeniable. The story of the map is quiet, but its implications thunder. If it is true, then someone must have seen the world when the poles were not yet buried under miles of ice. That would mean a civilization capable of global exploration existed long before ours, perhaps before the last great flood around 12,000 years ago, when sea levels rose more than 100 meters and erased entire coastlines. If so, then what we call prehistory may only be the faint afterglow of their world, surviving through a handful of maps, stones, and myths. The Orance Fine map of 1531 shows something similar, Antarctica drawn with uncanny accuracy, as if its maker remembered a time when the continent was green before the ice locked it away. Modern geology supports that possibility. Ice cores reveal that parts of the Antarctic coast were indeed free of ice around 10,000 BCE. The alignment is too close to dismiss as coincidence. These maps, scattered through time, are like shards of a lost mirror, reflecting a vision of Earth before catastrophe. Some argue that ancient sailors, perhaps Phoenicians or Greeks, had explored far south and recorded what they saw, parsing down the data through secret archives that survived into the Renaissance. Others go further, suggesting that even those explorers were inheritors of something older still, a knowledge preserved from an age when sea routes circled the globe and the stars were both compass and scripture. Such claims stretch the patience of academia, yet the evidence lingers. The precision of longitude and latitude, the awareness of spherical curvature, these are not guesses, they are measurements. To draw a map like Piri Reis's, one would need to know not only the shape of coastlines but their scale relative to a spherical Earth. That concept was not verified until the time of Magellan centuries later. Yet here it is, hundreds of years too early, depicting the world as seen from above, like the memory of flight, or a knowledge passed down by those who once viewed Earth from a different vantage. And then there is the question of Antarctica. Beneath the ice, satellite scans have confirmed mountain ranges, river valleys, and coastlines hidden for millennia. It was not always a wasteland. There was a time, long before the flood, when the planet's axis was different, and the southern lands basked in temperate sunlight. If someone lived there then, the ice has entombed their world completely. What we call the last ice age might simply have been the slow burial of their memory. The flood myths could be geological diaries of that time, encoded memories of rapid sea rise told and retold until they became divine punishment stories. Scientists now call that event the Younger Dryas meltwater pulse, when glacial lakes burst into the oceans and redefined the world's coastlines almost overnight. The waters would have erased entire cultures living near the shores. If they had ships, knowledge, maps, they too would sink, leaving only what survivors could recall. And perhaps those survivors became the teachers of post-flood humanity, guiding new societies that emerged around 10,000 BCE. It would explain why agriculture, architecture, and astronomy seemed to appear suddenly and simultaneously in distant places, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to the Andes. The knowledge was not invented, it was remembered. There is something poetic in that thought. The idea that humanity is a vessel carrying fragments of an older song, passed through floods and fire, reassembled each time the world resets. Maybe those old maps are verses from that song, reminders that we have walked this circle before. Skeptics dismiss these maps as coincidences, arguing that early cartographers simply copied distorted coastlines. But distortion alone cannot explain the underlying accuracy, the consistent ratios, the mathematical curvature, the presence of land masses unknown to their era. To believe it is all error requires more faith than to accept that ancient people might have known more than we give them credit for. It's not about proving that an advanced civilization existed before the flood. It's about listening to the quiet suggestion that history may not be linear. That knowledge, like the tide, advances and retreats. That memory itself is cyclical, and we are merely at the crest of one of its waves. There are other maps too, fragmentary, dismissed as curiosities. The Boache map from 1739 also shows an ice-free Antarctica, but divided into islands and river valleys, matching what modern radar now confirms beneath the ice. How could Boache, who never saw the continent, draw what science would only discover centuries later? He claimed to have based it on ancient sources. Those sources have never been found. Perhaps they were destroyed, or perhaps they were never written, only passed by hand, whispered through orders of scholars, priests and explorers, guarding remnants of forbidden knowledge. The more one looks at these old charts, the more they resemble memory itself, fragmented, overlapping, distorted by time, yet somehow coherent when viewed from afar. Like dreams recalled at dawn, they point to something that once was, something vast and whole, before the sea rose and made our ancestors forget. If we could lay all these maps side by side, the Ottoman, the French, the Greek, the unknown, we might glimpse a single hidden outline, the shape of a lost world traced in the collective subconscious of humanity. A world that still calls to us through myth and magnetism, through the ancient instinct that tells us we are not the first. The seas rose, and with them, the amnesia of our species. Yet memory leaves fingerprints in the strangest places, on stone, on parchment, on the tilt of an axis frozen in ice. And somewhere beneath that silence, beneath 7 miles of frost, lies a coastline that remembers sunlight. Perhaps, when the world was young, its cartographers were not explorers at all, but witnesses, and their maps were not predictions, but farewells. Sometimes silence weighs more than any monument. Across the world, colossal stones stand in defiance of everything we understand about ancient engineering. They do not speak, but their presence unsettles the timeline of history. They are the impossible survivors of a forgotten age, the remnants of a world that should not have been able to exist. Imagine walking through the ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon. Beneath the Roman temple that tourists see today lies something far older, a foundation made of megaliths so vast that even our modern cranes would tremble before them. The largest of these blocks, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs more than 200 tons. To carve, move, and position such a stone with perfect alignment would be difficult even with modern machinery. Yet it was done in antiquity. No records explain how. The Romans, meticulous in their inscriptions, left none describing the movement of these stones. They built atop them, yes, but did they place them? Or did they find them already there, relics of an older hand? The question stretches further back than architecture. It reaches into the bedrock of our own understanding. Because when you walk among these ancient stones, in Baalbek, in Pumapunku, in Sacsayhuaman, you begin to feel that something fundamental is missing from the story we tell ourselves. The precision is uncanny. Blocks interlocked like puzzle pieces, not just fitted but mated. Each surface smooths to a tolerance finer than a human hair. They resist earthquakes, weather, and time, as though they were not built merely for shelter, but for eternity itself. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones lie scattered across the Andean plateau as though some cosmic hand had torn apart a cathedral. They're made of andesite, one of the hardest rocks on Earth, yet carved with right angles and drill holes so perfect that modern engineers blink in disbelief. Laser scans reveal machining marks, parallel grooves, and symmetry that suggest not primitive tools, but precision instruments. The mainstream explanation says they use stone hammers and copper chisels, but copper bends before andesite. To hold a chiseled such stone would leave no trace, only frustration. Still, the stones remained, shaped as if they were once soft, as if molded or cut with knowledge now lost. Archaeologists propose simple explanations: ingenuity, patience, communal effort. Yet those words feel hollow when you stand before the scale of the work. It is one thing to stack stones. It is another to fuse them into seamless geometry that defies erosion for millennia. At Sacsayhuaman, the walls ripple like frozen waves, each stone locking into the next as though the builders understood the heartbeat of the earth itself. No mortar, no repetition. Every piece unique, every joint invisible. And it's not just in one corner of the world. Across continents, in Egypt, Peru, Turkey, Japan, the same methods appear, the same architectural fingerprints, as though the builders were following an ancient template older than any culture we know. Could there have been a shared origin, a pre-flood civilization whose architectural grammar was inherited by all that came after? Or are we witnessing something even stranger? The memory of geometry itself, encoded in human consciousness, resurfacing again and again like a dream retold. At Giza, the Great Pyramid's base is leveled with an accuracy of less than 2 centimeters across 13 acres. The blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, are aligned to true north within fractions of a degree. The limestone casing, now mostly gone, once shone like white gold under the sun, reflecting light so brightly that ancient travelers described the pyramid as a mountain of light. Its proportions encode P and the golden ratio, linking mathematics to myth, earth to sky. Yet no hieroglyph explains its purpose. No inscription boasts its construction. For a monument so immense, it is oddly silent about itself, as if it belonged to an age before pride. when knowledge was sacred and anonymity divine. When archaeologists date the pyramids, they date the surrounding tombs, not the stones themselves. The granite within bears marks of erosion and quarrying that suggest reuse. Older material reshaped for new dynasties. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist, noted similar weathering on the Sphinx enclosure, implying that it predates Egypt's desert climate, perhaps older than 9000 BCE. His peers dismissed him, yet the evidence remains carved into the stone. Rain, not wind, carved those grooves, which means that the Sphinx stood before the Sahara turned to sand, before history as we know it. If that is true, then the builders of the Sphinx, and perhaps the foundations of Giza itself, lived in a climate we would not recognize. They watched the Nile flow through a greener world, and they built for reasons lost to us. Perhaps their monuments were not tombs or temples, but resonant structures, devices that harmonized with the Earth's vibrations, capturing energy in ways our technology still struggles to understand. The ancients spoke of the word that shaped creation, of sound that moved stone. Modern researchers studying acoustic levitation have shown that sound frequencies can indeed lift and mold granular materials. What if, in some long-forgotten epoch, that knowledge was not myth but method? Imagine sound as the original tool, resonance as the original architect. The very stones of Baalbek or Puma Punku might be the frozen chords of a civilization that built not with brute force, but with harmony. There's something humbling in that thought. The possibility that the ancients were not merely builders but listeners, that they tuned their monuments to the pulse of the earth like instruments of memory. Perhaps the true function of these sites was not religious or practical, but mnemonic, a way to remember the frequencies that held their world together. We often look at these ruins and assume they mark beginnings, but what if they are endings, the last attempts of a dying world to leave behind proof of its existence? Each cut, each polished face, each impossible block could be a message, written not in language but in endurance, a statement that says, "We were here. We understood more than you think." In the quiet of the evening, when the air cools and the last light slips across the edges of stone, those messages become almost audible. You can feel the weight of time pressing through them, not as history, but as memory. The stones do not demand belief. They only ask us to question the neatness of our own ignorance. If these structures truly predate the flood, then they are the lost handwriting of an erased civilization. The sea took their cities, the wind took their names, but their monuments still breathe. Every angle, every joint, every impossibly heavy block whispers the same question. Who built this, and why did they want us to remember? Maybe the answer is not hidden in the stones themselves, but in what they reflect. The quiet realization that we are not as new as we think, that our story began in a world now drowned, and these ruins are the shorelines of our own forgotten dawn. Some ruins seem built not to impress the eye, but to speak to the elements themselves. Water that flows with purpose, light that falls in measured silence. These are not the works of ordinary builders, but of those who understood the earth as an instrument, something to be tuned, not conquered. When we walk among the oldest sanctuaries, from Anatolia to the deep ocean floor, there lingers a sensation that these places once vibrated with an intelligence that merged physics with reverence, and perhaps that union of stone, light, and flow was the very soul of the world before the flood. In southeastern Turkey, long before the first cities were thought to exist, the stones of Göbekli Tepe rise from the soil like the vertebrae of some buried titan. Carbon dating places it around 9600 BCE, centuries before agriculture, before metallurgy, before history. Yet, its builders carved towering pillars of limestone weighing up to 20 tons, each etched with animals, constellations, and symbols that feel more like equations than decorations. The site was deliberately buried at the end of its use, as if its keepers were hiding it from time itself. What was Göbekli Tepe? A temple, some say. A gathering place for shamans, say others. But the site hums with geometry. The pillars form circles that echo the motion of stars, each alignment capturing celestial events, the rising of Sirius, the precession of the equinoxes. It's as if the builders sought to synchronize the heavens and the earth, making architecture into a kind of cosmic metronome. When the wind passes through its hollowed chambers, it produces a low vibration, almost musical, as though the stones were tuned to resonate with the frequency of the planet itself, and it's not alone. Across oceans, similar mastery of resonance appears in places separated by continents and millennia. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a subterranean complex carved into limestone around 4000 BCE, has chambers that amplify sound in frequencies measured around 110 Hz, known today to affect the human brain's alpha waves, inducing calm or trance-like states. It is a tone that sits between heartbeat and breath, as if engineered to guide consciousness into the stillness between thoughts. In that darkness, a human voice doesn't merely echo, it multiplies. One whisper becomes a choir. A single syllable blooms like thunder. Perhaps these chambers were not meant for the dead, as archaeologists suggest, but for transformation, for aligning mind and matter. In such a space, the line between meditation and physics dissolves. The ancients did not separate the sacred from the scientific. They understood that sound, light, and water were not just tools, but mediums of memory. Light, too, was a language. At Newgrange in Ireland, a tomb built more than 5,000 years ago, a single shaft of sunlight pierces the inner chamber only once a year. At dawn on the winter solstice, the beam travels down a narrow passage, striking a carved spiral at the back wall. For 17 minutes, the dark fills with gold, then returns to shadow. That precision required astronomy, geometry, and patience beyond the measure. But it also reveals something more intimate. The builder's devotion to cycles, to renewal, to the heartbeat of the cosmos. Underwater, near Japan's Yonaguni Island, lie terraces and steps descending into the sea, shaped with such regularity that they blur the line between geology and design. Sonar scans reveal right angles, pillars, and platforms cut into bedrock, now submerged 30 meters below the surface. Some geologists insist they are natural formations, sculpted by erosion, yet divers report chisel-like grooves, tool marks, and stone walls resembling ancient fortifications. The last time that land was above sea level? Around 10,000 BCE, the end of the Ice Age, when rising seas drowned coastlines across the world. If Yonaguni was once a city, it would belong to a forgotten civilization that built along the shores before the Great Melt. There's a thread running through all of these places: water, resonance, light. The builders did not fight nature, they collaborated with it. In Egypt, the Temple of Karnak and the Osirian of Abydos used subterranean water channels beneath their foundations. These channels, now filled with silt, once carried the Nile's flow beneath the sanctuaries, generating low vibrations that could have altered the air above. Some researchers believe this was intentional, that the temples were designed as resonant chambers, amplifying frequencies that interacted with the human body and the Earth's magnetic field. In the Andes, near Lake Titicaca, ancient stone conduits channel water through labyrinthine networks, creating specific tones as it flowed. Local myths speak of singing rivers, and modern researchers have recorded harmonic vibrations that shift with the water's speed. The design was musical, mathematical, spiritual, perhaps all at once. It's as if these cultures knew something about the resonance between sound, water, and consciousness that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Could it be that before the flood, the earth itself was used as an instrument, a symphony of water and light, guided by human hands? If so, those hands were not primitive. They were fluent in the languages of frequency, vibration, and alignment. They shaped stone to sing, designed chambers to hum, and placed monuments where light and shadow performed celestial choreography. These were not builders of empire, they were caretakers of equilibrium. Then came the deluge. The balance shifted. The rivers rose, the resonance fell silent, and the instruments were buried beneath mud and memory. What remains are only fragments, pillars out of place, chambers without sound, reflections of a technology too elegant to survive a world obsessed with progress. It's strange to think that the flood did not just erase a civilization. It may have erased an entire worldview, one that did not see the planet as material to be extracted, but as a living organism to be harmonized with. The ancients may have built not for power, but for communion. Their monuments were not declarations, but dialogues between human and earth, matter and spirit. Today, when researchers send sound waves into the ground, the earth still responds. It vibrates softly in harmonic tremors. Sometimes, the frequency echoes that of the ancient chambers, 110 Hz, the same resonance that lulled voices in the hypogeum thousands of years ago. It's as if the planet remembers, even if we do not. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the lost architects. Not the stones they left behind, but the quiet knowledge that harmony is the real foundation of civilization. The flood may have silenced their cities, but not their song. If you listen carefully, in the wind through old corridors, in the pulse of tides, you might still hear it, faint and eternal. There are places where silence is not the absence of sound, but the residue of memory. These Sahara deserts stretching endlessly beneath the sun feels like one such place. A vast ocean of sand concealing what might once have been a living world. The wind moves across its surface as waves once did, whispering not of dunes but of forgotten rivers, buried cities, and a civilization erased so completely that only the earth's skin remembers it ever existed. Long ago, this desert was not a wasteland. It was green, vibrant, breathing with life. Satellite imagery today reveals ghost rivers winding beneath the sand, their dried arteries branching across an area once lush with lakes, savannas, and forests. Scientists call this period the African humid phase, a time between 12,000 and 5,000 years ago when monsoons swept northward and the Sahara bloomed. Yet even that scientific phrasing cannot capture the strangeness of what has been found buried there. In 2015, radar scans conducted by NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission revealed the outlines of what appears to be a massive ancient river system, stretching over 1,000 kilometers, now completely hidden beneath dunes. It would have been as mighty as the Nile, flowing through what is now one of the driest places on Earth. Along its course, archaeologists have discovered stone tools, pottery fragments, and faint geometric patterns in the landscape that may indicate the remains of settlements. These are not the random camps of nomads. They suggest continuity, structure, and most of all, knowledge of the land. To think of the Sahara as once alive is to confront a paradox, that our planet's greatest desert was once the cradle of an unknown people. Some of their traces still cling to the edges of memory, in petroglyphs depicting elephants, giraffes, crocodiles, and human figures swimming in water. These carvings, found in places like the Tassili Nadja Plateau in Algeria, are more than art. They are testimony. They tell of an age when the Sahara was an inland sea, and its inhabitants watched the rains return each year with rhythm and certainty. The paintings show boats, circular dwellings, rituals under stars. Some even depict figures with elongated heads and flowing garments, beings that scholars argue represent gods or ancestors. Others see something else, the lost record of a people who survived the Great Flood, migrating inland to escape the rising seas. If the world before the flood truly existed, the Sahara might have been its heart. Before the desert claimed it, this land lay at the intersection of ancient trade winds, equatorial rains, and magnetic currents, a natural hub for early civilization. Its rivers could have connected west to the Atlantic, east to the Nile, south toward Lake Chad, and north toward the Mediterranean. Such a nexus would have allowed ideas, symbols, and technologies to spread in every direction, like veins carrying lifeblood through the body of the planet. But then, something changed. Around 5000 BCE, the monsoons shifted. Slowly at first, then suddenly the rains withdrew, the soil hardened, lakes evaporated, the great rivers turned to dust. People fled toward the Nile carrying fragments of their culture, stone carving, irrigation, astronomy, and perhaps their stories of a flood that once drowned the world. Egypt may not have been born in isolation. It could be the last survivor of that vanished green empire, built by refugees of a lost ecosystem. Some Egyptologists quietly acknowledge this possibility. The sudden sophistication of early dynastic Egypt, its writing, its geometry, its reverence for cosmic order, seems less like invention and more like remembrance. And yet, beneath the desert, whispers persist. In 2019, French researchers using ground-penetrating radar detected rectangular anomalies deep under the sand near the Gilf Kabir Plateau, a place so remote it was once called the Cave of Swimmers. The shapes appeared artificial, straight lines and right angles buried under 20 meters of sediment. Whether natural or constructed, their geometry defies the randomness of erosion. There is talk of underground chambers, of megalithic foundations sealed beneath what was once a river delta. Official studies are slow, hindered by heat, politics, and the difficulty of excavating a landscape that shifts with every storm. But the desert waits. It has waited for thousands of years. Legends among the Tuareg and Berber peoples speak of a city of the lions buried beneath the sands, a city of white stone, older than memory, whose inhabitants vanished when the sky turned dry. Some connect this to Herodotus' mention of a lost Libyan civilization that worshipped the sun in underground holes. Others link it to Plato's descriptions of Atlantis, which according to his own words lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, west of Egypt, across the great desert's expanse. Could the Green Sahara have been the true ground from which those legends grew? Not an island, but an inland sea surrounded by knowledge now turned to dust. Modern researchers studying sediment cores from beneath the dunes have found traces of freshwater diatoms, pollen, and microfossils from tropical plants. The evidence is undeniable. Lakes once shimmered here. But where there is water, there is habitation. And where there is habitation, there is story. Each grain of sand in the Sahara may be the residue of something that once lived, moved, and built. The earth does not forget. It only hides. If the Sahara was once a cradle, its desiccation may have been one of the greatest migrations in human prehistory. People moved east toward the Nile. Others went west to the Atlantic coast. Some perhaps followed the star southward into sub-Saharan Africa, and with them traveled fragments of language, myth, and memory. Linguists studying ancient African root words have traced surprising connections between the oldest Egyptian terms for river and words found in Saharan dialects long extinct. Even the earliest hieroglyph for water, 3 undulating lines, might be an echo of those lost rivers drawn by people who still remembered when the desert flowed. Standing now in that heat, it's almost impossible to imagine water here. The horizon shimmers, mirage blending with sky, and yet beneath the surface lie channels deep enough to have carried ships. Perhaps, when the flood consumed the coasts, survivors fled inland, seeking high ground, finding refuge in what they thought was stability, only for the climate to turn once more and bury their sanctuary in sand. The irony is profound. The flood that drowned their first world may have been followed by a second drowning, this time not in water, but in time. What was once ocean became land, and land became desert, and history became myth. The Sahara today is a graveyard of horizons, a mirror turned inward. Beneath it may sleep the true archives of humanity's first forgotten age. And if we could listen closely enough, through the hiss of wind, through the restless motion of sand, we might hear that old river again whispering in the dark. It would tell us that civilization has died and been reborn before, that even deserts remember, and that sometimes what seems most barren is only the surface of something waiting to breathe again. Beneath the ruins and rivers, deeper even than the layers of stone or the fossils in mud, there lies another archive, invisible, yet indelible. It is not carved into monuments or hidden in tombs, but written within the cells of every living being. DNA is not only a record of life's evolution, it is a silent witness, a library of survival that remembers things long before the first story was ever told. If civilization has risen and fallen more than once, then perhaps its echoes are not only buried beneath sand or ice, but folded into us, like ancient ink written inside our blood. In recent years, geneticists have traced the human story backward, with a precision unimaginable a generation ago. The journey leads to Africa, to a population so small it could have fit into a single valley. That is what they call the bottleneck, a moment around 70,000 years ago when humanity nearly vanished, reduced to a few thousand individuals. What catastrophe caused it remains debated. A volcanic winter, a sudden shift in climate, or something greater, a collapse that forced the survivors to rebuild from almost nothing. To the scientific mind, it was a near extinction, but to the poetic one, it feels like rebirth, a soft echo of the flood myth written not in tablets, but in chromosomes. And then there are anomalies, threads that do not quite belong, small fragments of DNA that appear older than they should be, or that seem to come from lineages not yet identified. Every genome sequence so far carries traces of interbreeding with archaic humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps others, still unnamed. But some fragments are stranger still, sequences that appear in isolated populations not matching any known ancestor. To most, these are genetic curiosities. To others, they hint at something older, a shadow branch of humanity, perhaps the genetic residue of those who lived before the flood, before the erasure. Ancient DNA found in sediments tells us that humans were moving through the Middle East, Asia, and even the Americas far earlier than once believed. Each new discovery pushes the boundary back further, like a horizon retreating before the dawn. If we listen carefully, it's as though evolution itself resists being tidy. We crave a single origin, a linear ascent, a clean story. But the genome does not tell clean stories. It tells of mixing, loss, renewal. It whispers of forgotten migrations, of experiments in survival. Some researchers have even found genetic markers that seem to appear suddenly, as though introduced from an external source, not slowly evolved. These sequences control brain development, immune response, and even the architecture of our skulls. It's tempting, too tempting, to wonder if these sudden leaps correspond to the bursts of creativity that define humanity. The invention of language, art, agriculture. Could those moments of brilliance scattered through prehistory be biological memories reawakening? Not the evolution of something new, but the reactivation of something old. A few geneticists, speaking cautiously, have proposed that epigenetics, the mechanism by which genes switch on and off in response to environment, might preserve not just traits but experiences. Trauma, adaptations, survival, all can leave marks in our DNA, passed down like whispers through generations. Studies of animals and humans show that stress, famine, even fear can imprint chemical changes that endure for centuries. If that is true, then perhaps the ancient cataclysm, the great flood, the fall of the Green Sahara, the night when fire fell from the sky, still lives within us, not as memory but as resonance. Sometimes, that resonance surfaces, in dreams, in myths, in the strange familiarity we feel when standing before ruins whose builders we do not know. Perhaps it is not imagination but recognition. Something deep within remembers a time when the world was different, when continents were joined, when the stars shone in patterns no longer visible. In Siberia, scientists extracted DNA from a child's tooth buried in a cave more than 40,000 years old. It belonged to a species neither Neanderthal nor modern human, but something in between. They called her a Denisovan. Yet her genetic markers appear in people across the Pacific, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea and the mountains of Tibet. How did her lineage travel so far across oceans not yet mapped? Was there once a network of migration, a prehistoric web connecting lands that today are separated by water? And if so, who navigated those distances, and why? Then there are the unexplained traces of genetic continuity in places once considered isolated. Aboriginal Australians carry some of the oldest genetic signatures on Earth, unchanged for tens of thousands of years, yet studies reveal shared haplogroups with populations as far away as South America. Conventional history says such contact was impossible. But DNA does not care about dogma. It tells its story regardless of belief. The same anomalies appear in linguistic roots, echoes between ancient Sumerian and early Dravidian languages, between Mayan glyphs and pre-dynastic Egyptian symbols. Could it be coincidence? Or could both language and DNA act as parallel records of one long migration, one that began before the sea rose and divided us? If so, then the flood may not have been a single event, but a series of collapses that fragmented a once unified human network. We are not the children of one origin, but the scattered remnants of many beginnings. Every so often, a study surfaces that shakes the comfortable narrative of modernity. A skull found in Morocco dated to 300,000 years ago, older than our species was thought to be. Fossilized footprints in Mexico suggesting humans walked there 23,000 years ago. Genetic data revealing contact between humans and archaic cousins long after their supposed extinction. Each discovery feels like a window opening into a deeper time, then closing again as the academic world turns away. Perhaps the hesitation is not scientific, but psychological. To admit that civilization has forgotten its own past is to face the possibility that we may forget again. If knowledge is a cycle, then maybe DNA is its metronome. It keeps time in silent repetition, measuring extinction and renewal. Every generation is restoration, every adaptation a form of remembrance. The myths of floods, of divine punishment, of lost golden ages may be less about gods and more about the rhythm of inheritance. The way catastrophe prunes the tree, forcing the surviving branches to begin anew. We often speak of evolution as progress, as ascent. But what if it is more like breathing, a cycle of expansion and contraction? Civilizations rise, genes adapt, memory accumulates, then collapses back into silence, waiting for the next breath. And through it all, the Earth listens, recording everything in its mineral and biological archives, including us. When you stand beneath the night sky and feel something ancient stir, something that has no name but feels like homesickness for a place you've never been, perhaps that is the DNA of memory calling. Perhaps what you feel is not imagination, but recognition. Because memory is not always in the mind. Sometimes, it's in the marrow. Long before the first word was written, before alphabets carved the world into meaning, symbols were already alive. They emerged like fossils of thought, recurring, abstract, yet strangely familiar, across continents that had never met. Spirals, crosses, circles, grids, serpents, eyes. These patterns appear everywhere, etched on stone, painted in caves, woven into fabrics, burned into pottery. They predate writing, yet they communicate. They are not random. They are memory taking form before language was born. Archaeologists call them proto-symbols, the vocabulary of the human subconscious. Some appear as early as 40,000 years ago, carved beside the silhouettes of hands in Paleolithic caves. Others decorate burial stones, jewelry, and temples that predate agriculture. They have no obvious function, yet their repetition is deliberate, as if the same message were whispered from one generation to the next across oceans of time. When you stand before one, a spiral chipped into granite, a zigzag chiseled into bone, it feels less like art and more like recognition, as though the symbol is speaking a language you once knew, but have long forgotten. In the heart of Europe, near the banks of the Danube, archaeologists unearthed a series of tablets inscribed with geometric marks. They are small, unassuming pieces of fired clay known as the Tertaria tablets, dated to around 5300 BCE, older than Sumerian cuneiform, which scholars still call the first writing. Their symbols are not words but sequences, crosses, chevrons, trees, loops. Some resemble constellations, others resemble numbers. The discovery troubled historians because it implied that symbolic communication, organized, structured, existed in Neolithic Europe long before Mesopotamia's city-states. It suggested that writing may not have been invented once, but remembered. Nearby, in what is now Serbia, the Vinča culture left thousands of carved signs on pottery, figurines, temple floors. The same motifs recur across vast distances: double spirals, nested triangles, concentric circles. Linguists studying them notice something uncanny. These shapes reappear in the early Sumerian and even early Indus Valley inscriptions, as if the same symbolic grammar had drifted across time and geography. Were they coincidences or fragments of a single ancestral system? The first shared human language, one of symbol rather than sound. Symbols are resilient because they transcend speech. They survive translation. They are the bones of thought. When a flood erases cities or empires crumble, words vanish, but symbols endure. Perhaps that is why so many flood myths describe survivors engraving their knowledge into stone. It was not a metaphor. It was insurance, to ensure that when memory drowned, its skeleton would remain. Across the world, from the petroglyphs of Australia's Kimberley region to the labyrinth carvings of Scandinavia, the same spiral reappears, turning inward, then outward, infinite and self-contained. Some interpret it as the path of the sun, or the unfolding of creation, but it also mirrors something deeper: the pattern of galaxies, whirlpools, even DNA. It is the geometry of recurrence, the shape of history itself. The ancients may not have had telescopes or microscopes, yet they intuited these forms, as though knowledge flowed through the psyche as much as through observation. Even in the oldest temples like Göbekli Tepe, the carvings are not random. Foxes, scorpions, vultures, abstract hate shapes, and serpent motifs all repeat with deliberate order. Scholars now believe some of these align with star constellations visible 12,000 years ago. The site may have been a codex of myth and astronomy fused into one, a stone book from the dawn before writing. But who could read it now? The language of symbol demands a different kind of literacy, one that modern minds have nearly lost: the ability to feel meaning instead of define it. Consider the Eye of Horus in Egypt, the third eye of India, the all-seeing eye of the Andes. 3 continents, 3 civilizations, one symbol, an eye radiating light or tears. It represents perception, illumination, awareness. But is it possible these eyes all descend from a single ancestral image, carried through migrations after the flood, encoded into myth wherever humanity rebuilt? Symbols, after all, migrate more easily than people. They survive in pattern, in ritual, in instinct. There is a haunting continuity in these marks. The cross, 2 intersecting lines, appears everywhere, long before Christianity. It may have originally signified the union of directions, the meeting of heaven and earth. The serpent, twisting around itself, symbolized eternity in Egypt, renewal in Mesoamerica, and balance in China. The same creature, the same gesture, the same idea, emerging again and again as if humanity's collective memory were replaying fragments of an older dream. Some researchers tracing the global distribution of these symbols have begun to see them not as inventions, but as inheritances. The linguist Maria Gimbutas once called them the language of the goddess, an ancient symbolic system expressing harmony, cycles, and creation. Others believe they encode cosmology, the pre-flood understanding of geometry, time, and energy, preserved through art when the science was lost. Whatever their origin, the recurrence is undeniable. If one overlays ancient symbols from different cultures, patterns begin to emerge. Spirals morph into eyes, eyes into suns, suns into wheels, wheels into crosses. It is as though all symbols are facets of one meta-symbol, the original grammar of consciousness. Even modern alphabets still carry these shapes stripped of their spiritual meaning but alive in structure. The letter O, the circle, the zero, all are descendants of the oldest symbol, the void, the whole, the beginning and the end. Perhaps what we call writing was not the invention of civilization, but its simplification. The earliest humans might not have needed words because their symbols were experiential, visual equations that conveyed not only ideas, but emotion, rhythm, even vibration. When language evolved, it fractured that unity. The world was divided into nouns and verbs, heaven and earth, subject and object. Words named things, symbols united them. And so, buried beneath our alphabets lies the ghost of a universal tongue. We see it still in dreams, in art, in the unexplainable familiarity of ancient signs. When an archaeologist brushes dust off a spiral carved into stone, they are not just uncovering art. They are unlocking a word from the first human sentence ever written. If civilization before the flood existed, perhaps its greatest legacy was not in its cities, but in its symbols. When the waters came, when fire rained and the skies turned red, their libraries drowned, but their symbols floated, carved on stones, painted on caves, hidden in the weft of myth. And they survived, waiting for someone, someday, to remember how to read them again. In that sense, symbols are not relics, they are seeds. They wait in silence, patient as the earth itself, knowing that one day a mind will bloom that can once more understand what they mean. Maybe that mind is yours. There are ruins that seem to look upward, as if the stones themselves remember the night sky. Across continents and millennia, ancient monuments align with celestial bodies in ways too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The pyramids of Giza trace Orion's belt. Stonehenge captures the solstices. The temples of Angkor mirror the constellation Draco. The great city of Teotihuacan reflects the movement of the Pleiades. It is as though the architects of prehistory built not merely for Earth but for the heavens, translating the sky into stone, turning constellations into geometry. When we walk among these ruins, what we see are the shadows of an ancient astronomy, an awareness of the cosmos that feels both mathematical and devotional. The builders of the old world seemed to believe that architecture was a bridge, that to build in harmony with the stars was to place oneself within the order of creation. The temples and pyramids are not random monuments, they are frozen equations mapping the heavens onto the ground. At Nabta Playa, in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt, there lies a circle of stones older than Stonehenge by 2,000 years. Beneath the sand, archaeologists found alignments marking the rising of Sirius and the solstice sun, dated to roughly 6,000 BCE. These people, often dismissed as nomads, had mapped the heavens with a sophistication rivaling later civilizations. Yet, unlike the pyramids, their monuments were not for display. They were humble, hidden, and purposeful. The alignment suggests ritual observation, perhaps an early calendar, perhaps something more, a record of memory. The sky as it was before catastrophe reshaped it, because the sky too has changed. The tilt of Earth's axis, the slow wobble known as precession, shifts the stars' positions across millennia. What we see tonight is not what the ancients saw, and yet, when astronomers reverse that movement, winding time backward, something strange happens. The constellations perfectly align with monuments thousands of years older than their supposed builders. The pyramids of Giza, for instance, match the layout of Orion's belt not in 2500 BCE, but around 10,500 BCE. The same epoch when the Sphinx enclosure shows signs of heavy rainfall. The same epoch when the last ice age was ending. The same epoch many legends place the flood. To suggest that these alignments are deliberate is to imply that knowledge of precession, a cycle spanning nearly 26,000 years, was known long before recorded history. Such understanding would require generations of careful observation, parsing star positions from father to son, priests to initiate for thousands of nights, and yet culture separated by oceans. The Egyptians, the Maya, the Khmer, the Inca, all encoded this same cosmic rhythm into their architecture. How could they all have known? Perhaps they did not learn it anew. Perhaps they inherited it. In the high Andes, at the site of Machu Picchu, the Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun, marks the moment when the sun stands still at the solstices. In the Yucatan, the pyramid of Chichen Itza produces a descending serpent of shadow at the equinox, coiling down its staircase in living light. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor Wat mirror the stars of Draco, their causeways and moats aligned to solstice sunrises and the lunar cycle. Even in China, the pyramids of Xi'an form constellations visible in the northern sky. Around the same time, the Giza pyramids mirrored Orion in the south. These were not coincidences. They were a system, an inherited memory of the stars before the heavens shifted. The question is not how they built such structures, but why. Why did so many ancient societies orient their sacred sites to the sky? Some say it was religious, a way to worship the gods of light. Others argue it was practical, for agriculture, for timekeeping. But these explanations feel too small. The precision of the alignments, the scale of the effort, suggest reverence of a deeper kind, as though they sought to rebuild the sky itself on Earth, to remember a pattern that once governed all things. The Dendera zodiac in Egypt, carved on the ceiling of a temple built long after the pyramids, shows an arrangement of stars not matching the night sky of its own era. It is a map of the heavens as they were millennia earlier. Perhaps copied, perhaps remembered. It suggests continuity, not invention, a parsing down of knowledge so ancient that even those preserving it no longer understood its origin. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the emu in the sky, a constellation formed not of stars but of the dark dust lanes of the Milky Way, a cosmic shadow. The Dogon people of Marley, who claim descent from teachers who came from the star Sirius, long knew that it had a hidden companion star, invisible to the naked eye, centuries before modern astronomy confirmed it. Their mythology describes the orbit and density of that companion, Sirius B, with uncanny accuracy. How could they have known? The question echoes through history unanswered but persistent, like a star that refuses to fade. Maybe the builders who drew the stars did not see themselves as gods, but as witnesses, the lost chroniclers of a sky that was changing. When the flood came, whether by water, fire, or cosmic impact, the heavens themselves shifted. Constellations that once marked the seasons vanished from familiar positions. The old calendars died, and so they built in stone what could no longer be trusted to memory. They anchored the stars to the earth, so that even when the world turned and forgot, the alignment would remain. There is a strange humility in that. We often imagine ancient people as obsessed with eternity, but perhaps they knew eternity only through loss. To carve the heavens into stone is not a boast, but a lament, an attempt to keep hold of a cosmos slipping away. In that sense, every megalith, every pyramid, every star-aligned temple is both a monument and a message. They whisper, "We saw the sky change. They tell us that our ancestors were not merely stargazers, but astronomers of catastrophe, mapping the before and after of creation itself. When modern astronomers look for patterns in cosmic radiation or the drift of planets, they are not doing something new. They're continuing the same gesture, the human urge to connect what is above with what is below, to remember our place in the vast geometry of being. And maybe that is what those ancient builders wanted us to understand, that the stars are not distant. They are mirrors. When we look up, we're not observing the past. We are remembering it. Somewhere, in the silence between constellations, perhaps the lost architect of the world before the flood still look back, their own gaze carved into the very fabric of the night. And maybe, just maybe, we are the continuation of their dream, the new hands tracing the same old sky. The air in the polar regions feels older than time itself. Each gust carries whispers of millennia, locked in crystals of frozen air. Beneath the vast white deserts of Greenland and Antarctica lies not emptiness but memory, layer upon layer of atmospheric history, preserved like pages in a translucent book. Every flake of snow that fell thousands of years ago still exists somewhere in that depth, compacted into ice that remembers the breath of ancient forests, the smoke of vanished fires, and the temperature of forgotten suns. When scientists drill into those depths, they're not merely studying climate, they're reading the diary of the planet. The ice cores tell a story of rhythm and rupture, of long calm ages interrupted by sudden convulsions. One such convulsion marks the end of the Pleistocene around 12 to 800 years ago, a period known as the Younger Dryas. The data shows an abrupt cooling, then a violent warming, like the planet gasping between heartbeats. In the layers of that time, there are strange markers: soot, microspheres of glass, traces of platinum. To geologists, these are signatures of catastrophe, evidence of something that struck the Earth, melted ice, and darkened skies. Many now believe a comet or meteor exploded over North America, releasing energy greater than all the nuclear weapons on Earth combined. The impact would have vaporized glaciers, ignited forests, and sent shockwaves across the world. Sea levels rose rapidly, species vanished, and human cultures disappeared almost overnight. This event, sudden, devastating, global, matches too closely the flood myths carried by every civilization to be ignored. Perhaps the deluge was not divine punishment, but cosmic accident. If the ice remembers this, it remembers everything. Scientists can trace the moment of impact by the chemical fingerprints frozen within, layers rich in iridium, dust, and carbon. Beneath them lie ages of stability. Above them, chaos. It is the geological equivalent of an erased memory, a scar marking the boundary between worlds. And yet, even in this violence, the ice preserved fragments of the before. In Greenland's cores, researchers have identified pockets of trapped air over 100,000 years old. Inside them, they find pollen grains from trees that no longer exist there. Oak, birch, pine. Antarctica, too, holds secrets. Beneath 3 kilometers of ice, Lake Vostok has remained sealed for millions of years, untouched by light or air. Its waters contain microbial life forms unlike anything known, perhaps remnants of a biosphere that predates us entirely. The ice does not only remember catastrophe, it remembers continuity. Life endures, adapting, waiting. In some regions, radar has revealed buried landscapes, mountains, valleys, even river systems, hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. They're perfectly preserved, as if frozen mid-breath. The scans show that Antarctica was once not a land of ice at all, but a temperate continent covered with forests and lakes. Fossilized pollen and wood confirm it. The Peary Race map, the one drawn in the 16th century that shows an ice-free Antarctic coastline, suddenly feels less implausible. Perhaps that map was not a fantasy but a memory, passed down from a time when the poles were green. As the ice retreats now under the heat of our age, it exhales these memories. Methane from ancient swamps, viruses older than humanity, fragments of a world reborn. The more it melts, the more it speaks. But what it says is both revelation and warning. Within the isotopic ratios of hydrogen and oxygen, scientists detect cycles, pulses of temperature, of collapse and recovery, repeating every 12,000 years or so. It's as if the planet breathes in epochs, inhaling creation, exhaling extinction. If that rhythm holds true, we are again at the edge of a breath. Perhaps the flood was not a single event, but part of a recurring pattern, a resetting pulse of the earth itself. Civilizations rise between these pulses, like brief chords played between waves. When the temperature shifts, when the ice moves, those chords end, and the world begins a new song. We call it the end of an age, but maybe it is simply the next measure of a longer symphony. The ice also tells stories of humanity's resilience. In samples from the Himalayas, traces of soot and ash from campfires appear as thin black lines. They're evidence of human survival during the coldest nights of the Ice Age. Even when glaciers swallowed continents, people endured, adapting, remembering, parsing down the knowledge that the world could end and begin again. And when the thaw came, when rivers roared where valleys had been, they must have watched the rising waters and known, this has happened before. Somewhere deep within our collective psyche, that memory persists. It is why nearly every ancient culture spoke of floods, of destruction followed by renewal. It is why creation myths so often begin not with birth, but with rebirth. Land emerging from water, mountains rising from chaos. The ice holds that story literally frozen in time, while we hold it metaphorically, retold through parable and prayer. In a cave in Indonesia, researchers recently discovered a painting of a pig dated to 45,000 years ago, the oldest known representational art. Beside it were handprints, red and ochre, pressed into stone. DNA analysis shows that those pigments contain human skin cells still traceable. The artist who made them lived before the flood, before history, yet their breath, their touch still lingers. They may have seen the same glaciers forming that would one day erase their world. The ice remembers them too. When explorers stand on the Antarctic plateau where the sun circles endlessly without setting, the air feels sacred, thin, sharp, ancient. Sound travels strangely there, as though absorbed by time. To breathe is to inhale prehistory. Every exhale feels like returning something borrowed. It is easy to believe that the planet itself is alive, that it stores every memory in the deep freeze of its poles, keeping the record safe until we are ready to understand it. Perhaps that is the true function of ice, not to conceal, but to preserve. It waits patiently, holding the keys to our past until we ask the right questions. And perhaps, when the ice finally melts completely, whether by our doing or by the planet's own rhythm, those memories will surface again. The oceans will rise, yes, but they will also reveal new coastlines, old ruins, the bones of forgotten cities. The flood may come once more, not as myth, but as return. If we listen carefully, the ice does not simply warn us, it whispers, it says, remember what you were, remember what you lost. For buried in its silence is not only the record of extinction, but the promise of renewal. The ice is not dead, it dreams, and as it melts, the dream begins to wake. The sea keeps secrets better than any library. It swallows everything, mountains, forests, temples, even time itself, and holds them in cold suspension. Beneath its weightless silence lie the bones of continents, and perhaps the ruins of civilizations that existed before the memory of humanity. When we look out at the horizon, we see the edge of our world, but it may only be the surface of another, one that once lived, breathed, and built beneath the waves. Throughout ancient mythologies, there is a recurring story, that of teachers who rose from the sea after the flood. In Mesopotamia, they were called the Apkallu, the seven sages, beings who emerged from the waters to restore order, to teach writing, architecture, and law. In the accounts of Berossus, a Babylonian priest from the 3rd century BCE, one of these beings was named Wanes. He was described as half man, half fish, who spent the day among men, teaching wisdom, and the night beneath the sea, for he was amphibious. To the uninitiated it was myth. To those who remembered it was history disguised as allegory, the memory of survivors from a drowned world. Far to the west, the Dogon people of Marley tell of the Namo, water spirits who descended from the sky and dwelled in the lakes, teaching weaving, metallurgy, and cosmic order. Their stories include detailed astronomical knowledge about the star Sirius and its invisible companion Sirius B, long before modern telescopes confirmed its existence. Skeptics call it coincidence, yet the precision, the orbital period, the density, the position is unnerving. Either their ancestors were astronomers of extraordinary skill, or they were inheriting something remembered from those fish-like beings who once walked both land and water. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, the Olmecs carved colossal heads with distinctly non-local features, their origins lost to speculation. Legends from coastal Veracruz tell of bearded strangers who arrived by sea after a great deluge, bringing with them the knowledge of calendars and stars. The Maya, inheriting this legacy, revered Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, a being of dual nature, bridging heaven and earth, air and water. The pattern repeats endlessly. Teachers from the sea, bearers of forgotten knowledge, the first architects after the flood. Even in Japan, the myths of the Amabie and the Ningyo, aquatic beings who warn of calamities, reflect a lingering intuition that the ocean is not merely an abyss, but a source of prophecy. The Polynesians speak of Hina and Tangaroa, gods of the deep who guided their ancestors across vast waters by reading the stars reflected on the waves. Everywhere, in every corner of the world, the sea is not just the end of the land. It is the beginning of memory. If a civilization did exist before the flood, it would now rest beneath the sea. The evidence aligns with geology. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by over 100 meters. Entire coastal plains, the most habitable, fertile regions, vanished. The continental shelves around the world were drowned. Today, they lie beneath shallow seas, the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, the Doggerland of Northern Europe, the Bering Land Bridge that once linked Siberia and Alaska. On those now submerged lands, archaeology finds traces, tools, hearths, bone fragments that once belonged to people who lived before the deluge. In the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Gujarat, sonar surveys have revealed what may be the remains of a city beneath the Gulf of Khumbat. Stone structures, geometric layouts, and artifacts dating back 9,000 years were pulled from the depths. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, but the implications are staggering. If confirmed, it would rewrite the timeline of civilization, not Mesopotamia, not Egypt, but a coastal culture that predated them all, swallowed by rising seas and remembered only through the legend of Dwarka, the city of the god Krishna that sank into the ocean when its age was done. Similar ruins have been reported near Yonaguni in Japan, where terraces, steps, and columns descend into the deep. Divers describe rectangular walls and pathways, eerily human in their symmetry. Some say it is natural formation. Others see the ghost of an ancient port, perhaps from when sea levels were lower. The ocean gives no answers, only silence. But its silence feels intentional, as though it guards the threshold of a history too old for us to bear. Marine geologists estimate that nearly 10 million square miles of once inhabitable land now lie underwater. If early civilizations flourished near coasts, as ours do today, then most of their remains would be lost, not destroyed, merely hidden. Sonar has only mapped a fraction of the ocean floor. We've explored less than 5% of its total area. The truth, if it exists, is still out there, quietly preserved under pressure and darkness. There is something poetic in imagining that the sea itself is the ultimate archive. Unlike fire or desert, it does not burn or erode. It covers, seals, and preserves. Sunken cities off the coasts of Egypt, Greece, and India reveal marble pillars still standing, inscriptions still legible. Even wooden ships endure for centuries in the oxygen-poor depths. Perhaps the real ark of ancient memory was not a vessel that floated above the waters, but the waters themselves. The ocean is the Earth's own vault, safeguarding the story of its lost children. When we speak of the children of the deep, we may not be talking about gods or mythical creatures, but of those who adapted to a changing world. The survivors of the flood would have turned to the sea out of necessity, learning its moods, mastering navigation, spreading across the world's coasts as migrants, explorers, and teachers. Their descendants became the fishermen, the star watchers, the builders of tidal monuments who marked the moon's pull on stone. In that sense, perhaps we are all children of the deep, the inheritors of a trauma so ancient that it survives in our myths, in our art, even in our biology. The sound of waves, for instance, soothes the human brain. Scientists call it blue noise, a frequency range that calms the nervous system. But what if it does more than that? What if it triggers an ancestral memory of the sea that once took everything, and of the peace that followed when it gave the world back? The ocean is both cradle and grave. It creates life, and it reclaims it. In the depths of the Mariana Trench, new species glow in darkness, their bodies sculpted by pressure beyond imagination. In that eternal night, evolution still experiments. The deep does not forget how to create. So perhaps, when ancient myths speak of gods from the sea, they're not recounting encounters with beings from elsewhere, but remembering an older kinship, one that tied humanity to the tides. Before we learned to farm, we followed the waves. Before we built cities, we built boats. The ocean was our first teacher, and it may yet be our last. And if the ruins beneath the waves could speak, what would they tell us? That civilization is not a straight line, but a tide. It rises, it falls, and it always returns. The flood may have erased the builders of the old world, but their reflection remains on the water's surface, every time we gaze upon it and feel something nameless stir within us. Perhaps that stirring is not curiosity but recognition. Beneath the world we walk upon lies another world, one that never sees the light of day, yet holds the weight of everything that has ever happened. The earth does not forget. It records in silence, keeping the memory of fire, flood, and civilization in layers of stone. For every ruin visible on the surface, there are countless others entombed beneath, folded into the crust, the echoes fossilized in minerals and magnetic fields. When geologists strike the ground, they are listening to these archives, the memory of continents whispering through rock. There are stories buried so deep that they blur the line between myth and geology. Beneath the Giza Plateau, ancient legends spoke of secret chambers, archives hidden by the gods before the Great Flood, waiting for the time when humanity would once again be ready. The Greeks called it the Hole of Records. The Egyptians called it the House of Thoth. Modern archaeologists deny its existence, yet ground-penetrating radar conducted in the 1990s revealed cavities beneath the Sphinx's pores, symmetrical and unexplained. Some dismissed them as natural fissures. Others whispered that they were entrances to something older than Egypt itself, perhaps a relic from the civilization that taught the Egyptians the art of stone. The pattern repeats across the world. In Romania, myths tell of hidden holes beneath Mount Pachegi, a labyrinth of smooth tunnels sealed by unknown technology. Satellite imaging once showed geometric anomalies inside the mountain, sparking waves of speculation. In Turkey, the underground cities of Derinkuyu and Kaymakli stretch 8 levels below the surface, carved into volcanic rock. These were not simple shelters. They contained wells, ventilation shafts, and passages large enough for thousands of people. No one knows who built them. The oldest layers predate recorded history. The people who rediscovered them found the air still breathable, the water still flowing, as though the architects had expected to return. The same mystery haunts South America. Beneath Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca, runs a network of tunnels called the Chincana, the labyrinth. Locals claim they stretch for miles, connecting temples and fortresses across the Andes. Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century wrote of explorers who entered them with torches and never returned. When modern engineers attempted to map the tunnels, their instruments failed. Compasses spun wildly, as though disoriented by a magnetic field. It is as if the earth itself protects what it remembers. In the sands of Egypt, in the limestone of Europe, in the granite of South America, the planet carries imprints of things we do not yet understand. Scientists now know that even rocks can record events. When lightning strikes, it aligns particles of magnetite. When heat from a meteor impact ripples through the crust, it leaves chemical signatures that persist for millions of years. The planet is an archivist, patient and incorruptible. It keeps everything, even our forgetting. Somewhere beneath the Sahara, radar has detected massive voids, caverns large enough to contain cities. The desert hides them well, burying their entrances under dunes that shift each year. Satellite scans show patterns of straight lines, unnatural and precise, deep below the surface. Whether these are remnants of the lost river systems or the foundations of ancient structures, no one knows. But the Sahara is young, geologically speaking. Whatever lies below it was entombed in only the last 10,000 years, the blink of an eye to the earth, yet older than all our written history. If there truly are archives beneath our feet, perhaps they were not built for us but for time itself. The ancients may have known that fire and flood would erase their world, so they buried their knowledge not in scrolls or tablets, but in the planet's body. A medium that endures even when memory fails. They encoded wisdom in alignment, in resonance, in the magnetic pulse of stone. The whole of records, if it exists, might not be a library of objects, but a geological memory field, designed to awaken only when the planet's rhythm returns to the right frequency. It may sound poetic, but science edges close to that idea. Physicists have found that crystalline minerals can store data, even information patterns, far more durably than any human-made device. Quartz in particular can hold vibrations for billions of years. The ancients used quartz in temples and pyramids and megaliths. Was it decorative, or was it intentional, a way of making the earth itself remember? In South America, at Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca, stone blocks are embedded with tiny flecks of quartz that shimmer under the sun. They generate subtle electric charges under pressure. Piezoelectricity, a property only recently understood by modern science. The same principle is used in watches and radio transmitters. Yet here it was, thousands of years ago, in temples aligned with solstices and stars. These were not mere stones, they were transmitters, or perhaps recorders. If the Earth's crust is the ultimate archive, then maybe earthquakes, volcanoes, and magnetic shifts are not just geological accidents, but the planet's way of rewriting its own record, erasing what must be forgotten, preserving what must endure. Each tremor could be a turning of the page, each eruption a punctuation mark, and we, walking on the surface, are the briefest footnotes in a manuscript still being written. Modern scientists now map the planet's magnetic field, a force that has flipped dozens of times throughout history. Each reversal is recorded in rock, preserved in the alignment of minerals that capture the direction of the field at the moment they solidified. When the field changes, it leaves behind an invisible signature, a geological memory of polarity. These reversals coincide eerily with mass extinctions and climate upheavals. Perhaps they are not merely natural phenomena, but resets, global erasures followed by new beginnings. It is humbling to think that the Earth remembers more faithfully than we do. Beneath every city, every mountain, every forest, there lies a memory, pressed, compressed, waiting. We build monuments, write books, record our voices, but the ground beneath us has already done the same, more quietly, more patiently. If one could read the rock-like text, the story of humanity would be only a thin line near the top, a faint paragraph in an endless volume. Maybe those who came before the flood understood that. Maybe they knew that the truest archive is not one that can be opened, but one that can be felt. A resonance that travels upward through soil, into bone, into thought. We do not need to find the whole of records to hear it. Every step we take is an act of reading. Every stone underfoot is a word in that slow, vast language. Perhaps that is why certain places make us feel awe or dread without reason. Why ancient sites hum beneath the skin. Why mountains seem to breathe. They're not symbols or omens, they are memories. The earth is not mute, it simply speaks in a tongue too deep for sound. And if someday we listen carefully enough, perhaps the planet will open its archives, not with thunder or revelation, but with a quiet tremor, like a whisper through stone. You were here before, you will be here again. There is a strange cruelty in the way memory fades, not suddenly, but softly, like fog reclaiming a shoreline. Civilizations vanish the same way, not only through disaster but through forgetting. Stones crumble, stories distort, meanings shift, and what once was truth becomes legend. Somewhere between survival and progress, humanity forgets what it once knew. Perhaps this is not an accident, but a rhythm, a necessary erasure, a cleansing of the slate before the next beginning. The ancients spoke of it as a flood. We might call it entropy. But in every language, it is the same. The great forgetting. It is not hard to imagine that the first humans after the flood carried fragments of knowledge they no longer understood. Instructions without context, formulas without purpose. They remembered that their ancestors had known the stars, had built with light and stone, had spoken with the earth itself. But memory is fragile when separated from meaning. Over generations, what had been science became ceremony. What had been architecture became myth. The survivors built altars instead of observatories, recited prayers instead of equations, and told their children that once, long ago, gods had walked among them. The pattern is visible in every culture. In Mesopotamia, the knowledge of the Apkallu, those wise beings said to have emerged from the sea, became ritualized. Their once practical teachings of measurement, agriculture, and writing turned into sacred myths of divine revelation. In Egypt, what may have been an ancient understanding of resonance and energy transformed into religion. The hieroglyph for the Ankh, the symbol of life, might once have represented a device or principle, but by the time of the pharaohs, it had become ornament, its function forgotten, its shape preserved only because it felt important. The outer form remained, but the inner logic dissolved. In South America, the legends of Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl, godlike figures who taught humanity after the deluge, became moral tales of death and rebirth. Their real histories, if ever there were any, were absorbed by faith. And in Greece, the memory of a lost world became the story of Atlantis, told not as history, but as allegory, a warning against hubris. The same process repeats endlessly. Remembrance transformed into reverence, knowledge into worship. Humanity, it seems, is better at sanctifying what it does not understand than preserving it. Perhaps this forgetting is not simply human failure, but cosmic design. Each age, no matter how brilliant, must fade, because the weight of accumulated knowledge eventually crushes those who hold it. The mind cannot bear eternity. The earth resets itself through catastrophe, a flood, a comet, a climate shift, but the human psyche resets itself through forgetting. The survivors start again, lighter, innocent, unburdened by the full memory of what came before. They carry only echoes, half-remembered stories, fragments of language, enough to rebuild, but not enough to remember the cost. Archaeologists find traces of this amnesia in the record itself, tools made of materials we cannot identify, carvings of machines that should not exist, maps showing lands that no longer do. Each discovery is filed neatly into categories: symbolic, ceremonial, unexplained. Our institutions are built not to embrace mystery, but to contain it. And so the forgetting continues, sanctioned by reason, disguised as scholarship. Even today we are raised with the same devotion as our ancestors once recorded. We digitize, delete, overwrite. We trade permanence for convenience, wisdom for data. If an age before ours built in stone, we build in electricity, near fragile, fleeting, one surge away from silence. The next great forgetting may not come from fire or flood, but from the sudden loss of memory itself. A solar flare, an electromagnetic storm, and the archive of the world could vanish in seconds. All that would remain would be the stories we remember well enough to tell aloud. There is irony in how every generation believes it is the most advanced. We say history began with writing, yet the oldest symbols carved in rock still defy translation. We say technology began with the industrial age, yet magnetic anomalies in the Andes in Egypt hint at a forgotten understanding of energy and resonance. We say civilization is permanent, yet our cities would vanish in a century if the power failed. We say we are enlightened, yet we cannot recall what the ancients may have known intuitively, how to live in rhythm with the earth, not in dominion over it. Perhaps forgetting is not a flaw, but a safeguard. If knowledge were never lost, neither would arrogance be. The ancients might have understood this. Maybe that is why they encoded their wisdom in symbols, geometry, and myth, knowing that only those who approached it with reverence could rediscover it. They built in stone not to defy time, but to communicate across it, trusting that when humanity was ready to remember, the earth would show them the way. Still, the forgetting hurts. It haunts our myths with nostalgia, the sense that we are children exiled from a home we cannot name. We look up at the stars and feel a longing that science cannot quantify. We build machines to reach the heavens, not realizing that what we seek is not above us, but behind us. We want to remember the feeling of unity, of belonging to something vast and luminous. But memory, like light, bends as it travels. What reaches us is distorted. Myths of gods, tales of paradise, fragments of truth refracted through millennia of loss. Sometimes, late at night, when cities quiet and the hum of electricity fades, a deeper silence emerges, one that feels ancient. It's in that silence that the mind glimpses the old rhythm again, the faint vibration beneath the earth, the pulse that connects everything living. It is not gone. It is only hidden, muffled by noise and forgetting. The flood buried the cities, but the silence buried the knowing. The great forgetting is not just the loss of information, it is the loss of wonder. Once humans saw the sacred in every tree, every stone, every current of wind. Now we see only resources. The ancients built temples to the unseen. We build towers to ourselves. Perhaps the real catastrophe was not the flood, but the moment we stopped listening. And yet forgetting always carries the seed of memory. It is the pause before recollection, the silence before the song begins again. Each rediscovery, every excavation, every strange artifact, every myth that refuses to die, is the earth's way of whispering, "You have been here before." The great forgetting is vast but not infinite. One day the tide will turn again, the dust will lift, the archives of stone will speak, and the forgotten language of balance will return. Until then, we dream, half awake, tracing the faint outlines of a history that is ours, but not ours to remember fully. Not yet. And in that dream, somewhere between what was and what will be, the earth waits, patient as ever, holding every secret we have chosen to forget. Every age buries its heresies. Some it burns, some it silences, and some it simply forgets. But every so often something rises from the ashes, an idea too strange, too radiant, too ancient to die. The ancients may have called it sacred knowledge. Modern scholars might call it technology. Whatever the name, traces of it linger like ghosts in stone and metal, in legends of impossible craft and in the ruins that seem to hum with purpose. There was once, it seems, a science that the world was not meant to remember, a forbidden science that dissolved into myth when the flood came. When archaeologists first uncovered vitrified forts in Scotland, they were baffled. The stones were melted together, as though fused by a heat greater than any campfire could produce. Similar evidence appeared across Europe, in Turkey, and even in the Andes. Walls transformed into glass, not by nature, but by something deliberate. Some claimed they were the results of lightning strikes or volcanic eruptions, but many of these sites showed no sign of such causes. It was as if some unknown force, a blast of directed energy, had once swept across them, leaving the stones crystallized in its wake. Further east in India, ancient Sanskrit texts describe celestial weapons that sound eerily technological. The Mahabharata speaks of the Brahmastra, a weapon that released light brighter than 1,000 suns, followed by winds so fierce they scoured the land for generations. When early researchers first translated these passages, they thought them poetic exaggeration. Yet the descriptions, heat intense enough to turn sand into glass, fallout that poisoned survivors, shadows burned into walls, echo the aftermath of atomic explosions. In Rajasthan, in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists discovered skeletons lying in streets, their bodies still radioactive thousands of years later. Some were found holding hands as though they had been struck down suddenly. The buildings around them show signs of a blast so hot it melted brick into glass. Modern science calls this coincidence, but myth calls it memory. Ancient Egypt, too, may have hidden traces of such power. Within the Great Pyramid, the granite blocks of the King's Chamber bear signs of scorching. The interior geometry resonates with precise frequencies, 432 Hz, the same harmonic associated with Earth's natural vibration. Some researchers have speculated that these chambers could have functioned not merely as tombs, but as resonant cavities, machines designed to amplify sound or energy. The mixture of materials, limestone, granite, quartz, forms a natural piezoelectric circuit capable of converting vibration into electrical potential. Perhaps the ancients knew how to harness this resonance, drawing power from the planet itself. Modern engineers have tried to replicate this phenomenon. When sound waves are directed through the scale of the pyramid, energy fields emerge, subtle, invisible, but measurable. It is as if the structure itself remembers how to sing. Could it be that these monuments once functioned as part of a global network, channeling energy through resonance, like tuning forks across the Earth's crust? The idea sounds fantastic, yet it fits within a recurring pattern. Sacred sites built on ley lines, aligned with magnetic anomalies, connected by unseen geometry. We call it myth. Yet even our modern technology operates on principles not so different. Electricity, magnetism, vibration, all invisible, all real. What if the ancients had discovered another form of these forces, one that blurred the line between science and spirit? Their temples, their megaliths, their miracles might have been the natural application of an understanding we have long since lost. An understanding of how consciousness interacts with energy, how sound can move matter, how geometry can focus light. Consider the Baghdad battery, a small clay jar discovered in Iraq, containing a copper cylinder and iron rod. When filled with acidic liquid, it produces a mild electric current. Thousands of years old, its purpose remains debated. Toy, experiment, or remnant of a technology we can no longer recognize. A similar mystery surrounds the Antikythera mechanism, an intricate bronze device found in a shipwreck near Greece. Its gears predict eclipses, planetary motions, and lunar cycles, precision engineering unmatched until the Renaissance. Yet it dates to 100 BCE, and nothing like it appears again for over a millennium. Knowledge does not evolve linearly. It leaps, disappears, then returns, as if remembering itself. Perhaps that is the true nature of this forbidden science, not a body of lost inventions, but a recurring intelligence woven into human consciousness. When the conditions are right, when curiosity outweighs fear, it rises again. But when it threatens to free the mind too far from control, it is buried. Empires burn libraries, priests rewrite cosmologies, scientists dismiss what cannot be replicated. The cycle of remembering and forgetting continues. In the Vatican's archives, sealed beyond public reach, there are rumors of documents describing ancient machines, blueprints, translations of Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts that speak of living stones and singing metals. Some historians believe these were allegories. Others suspect that the early church, inheriting knowledge from the collapsing Roman world, deliberately suppressed anything that blurred the boundary between miracle and mechanism. To maintain the monopoly on the divine, one must bury the technology of the gods. Even today, whispers persist of discoveries quickly reclassified, samples confiscated, research silenced. In deserts, metallic spheres defying explanation are found embedded in strata millions of years old. In South Africa, the Klerksdorp spheres, perfectly round objects with grooved bands, are dated to nearly 3 billion years ago. They cannot be artificial, yet they appear made. Geologists shrug. The debate fades, the forgetting resumes, and still, the echoes remain. In every age, there are those who hear them. Artists, inventors, dreamers who receive visions they cannot explain. Nikola Tesla spoke of energy drawn from the ether, a universal vibration waiting to be tapped. He imagined wireless power transmitted through the ground, through resonance. The same principle that might have guided the ancient builders. His ideas were ridiculed, suppressed, and dismantled, yet they never died. Perhaps he too was remembering something old, a frequency that once united heaven, earth, and mind. It is tempting to romanticize this lost science, to see it as proof of gods or aliens. But maybe it is simpler and far more profound. Maybe the ancients understood what we are only beginning to rediscover, that the universe itself is a symphony of vibration, and consciousness is both instrument and listener. The technology was not external, it was participatory. To use it required harmony, not domination. And when humanity fell into discord, the harmony was lost. The flood washed away their monuments, but not the memory. It hums beneath everything, in quartz, in air, in thought. Every invention we create, every breakthrough we call new, is an echo returning from that first forgotten chord. The forbidden science is not gone. It waits within us, in the same silence where all knowledge begins. And perhaps the greatest heresy is not to rediscover it, but to remember that we already knew. Some shapes are older than history. Before the first word was spoken, before fire was tamed, before the first temple was carved, the circle already existed, not just in nature, but in thought. The sun, the moon, the eye, the wheel, the horizon, each a reminder of that perfect loop with neither beginning nor end. In every ancient culture, the circle became a symbol of creation, of time, of eternity. But perhaps long before it became a symbol, it was something else, a code, a formula, a blueprint from a world that understood geometry not as abstraction, but as the architecture of reality itself. When archaeologists unearthed stone circles across Britain, Africa, and the Middle East, they thought first of ritual. But standing within those rings, Averburi, Nub Playa, Gobekli Tepe, one feels something mathematical, not mystical. The placements follow celestial alignments, ratios of pi. Harmonic distance is measured in whole numbers. The circle, it seems, was not only sacred, it was functional. It was the first attempt to translate the rhythm of the cosmos into matter. To draw a circle was to echo the heavens. In the silence of a Neolithic dawn, an architect pressed a stick into soil and marked the first arc of stone. It was more than art. It was an invocation. Geometry is prayer. The ancients believed the universe was born from symmetry, from motion turning in on itself. The circle was the memory of that motion, the echo of creation. Its perfection could not be found in words, only in form. Perhaps that is why it appears everywhere, carved into megaliths, painted in caves, traced on pottery, mirrored in the orbits of stars. Pythagoras would later teach that number is the essence of all things. But long before him, others had known. The builders of the old world measured with intuition, not instruments. They aligned temples and cities to harmonic ratios that resonate through physics even today. 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, the intervals that make music pleasing to the human ear. These were not coincidences. They were the geometry of sound, the mathematics of vibration. The ancients did not separate science from spirit. Both were reflections of the same order. From this knowledge came the circle's child, the spiral. In the golden spiral, drawn from the Fibonacci sequence, the same proportion recurs endlessly, from seashells to galaxies. It is growth made visible, an unfolding that never breaks symmetry. To the ancients, this was not only a pattern of nature, but a lore of creation itself. The builders encoded it everywhere. In the coils of the Serpent Mound in Ohio, in the carvings at New Grange, in the curls of Greek volutes and Egyptian crowns. The spiral was a signature, perhaps left by those who understood that form and consciousness mirror one another, that awareness itself moves in spirals, not lines. Even the great circles of architecture, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the stupas of Asia, the stone rings of Europe, all seem to reach for the same invisible center. The axis mundi, the world's axis, was their spiritual pole, connecting heaven and earth. To stand at the center of one of these circles was to stand in balance between the cosmic and the terrestrial. The ancients may have believed that by aligning their works with that invisible geometry, they could preserve harmony with the universe itself. At Giza, the pyramid's base encodes the circumference of the earth and the length of its year. At Teotihuacan, the entire city forms a geometric grid, aligned to the rising of the Pleiades. In India's Vedic texts, sacred altars were built to mirror astronomical cycles, the ratios of their bricks matching the lunar calendar. Everywhere, geometry was treated as revelation. To know the circle was to know the divine. Yet somewhere along the way we forgot. Geometry became arithmetic. The sacred became utilitarian. The circle was reduced to compass and ruler, stripped of its power as symbol and song. The old builder's knowledge faded into superstition. What once was cosmology became decoration. But stones remember. Even today, when researchers map ancient sites worldwide, the same ratios emerge, not only between structures within a single culture, but across oceans. The distance between Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, the alignment of Angkor Wat and Easter Island, the longitudinal echoes between Machu Picchu and the Nazca lines, all fall into geometric harmonics. Was it chance? Or the fingerprint of a unified system, one that once spanned the earth? There is a theory, dismissed by many but persistent, that the ancients possessed a geodetic grid, a planetary web of energy lines that guided their architecture. Modern physicists studying electromagnetic fields have found that the Earth does possess geometric resonances, shaped by its magnetic poles and tectonic stresses. Ancient monuments appear to cluster along these nodes. Perhaps the builders understood that certain points amplified energy, not metaphorically, but literally. Perhaps their circles were not just maps of the sky, but instruments designed to tune the earth itself. In such a view, the circle becomes more than symbol or structure. It becomes a machine, not one of metal or fire, but of harmony. The ancients might have believed that creation itself was sustained by vibration, by the eternal motion of form. To participate in that harmony was to sustain life. To fall out of it was to invite chaos. The flood myths, the tales of collapse, may not describe divine punishment at all, but the consequence of losing that balance, a civilization out of tune with its own geometry. The circle also defined time. The ancients saw time not as a straight line but as a returning curve. History, like the stars, moved in cycles, golden ages, dark ages, rebirth. Each turning of the wheel brought renewal. Even now, the zodiac's circular form echoes that ancient vision, that everything returns, that forgetting is temporary, that the geometry of existence never breaks. In monasteries and temples, mystics still draw circles before they pray. In laboratories, physicists still map orbits, waves, and quantum loops. We are still tracing the same gesture, the curve of unity, even if we have forgotten why. Perhaps the circle endures because it is not only a shape, but a memory. To draw one is to unconsciously recall a time when knowledge and faith were one, when builders spoke to the stars, when the act of creation was itself an act of remembrance. The first hands that drew the circle might not have sought perfection. They were remembering it. And maybe, when you close your eyes and imagine the world turning, the moon circling the earth circling the sun circling the galactic core, what you're truly sensing is the same truth they once knew, that everything, from atom to cosmos, moves in endless embrace. The circle is not just geometry. It is the universe remembering itself. There are moments when the boundary between past and future feels thin, when one can almost sense that time is not a river, but a circle, folding in on itself. Every generation believes it is moving forward, yet the deeper truth may be stranger, that we are walking paths once trodden, repeating a cycle that began long before we were born. Perhaps history is not a story of progress at all, but of remembrance, of civilizations rising not to create something new, but to recall something ancient. And if so, then maybe the lost civilization before the flood did not vanish completely. Maybe it remembered us, just as we, in our dreams and myths, are remembering them. When archaeologists uncover the ruins of cities older than time's arithmetic, there is an uncanny familiarity. The polished stone, the celestial alignments, the geometry, none of it feels like invention, it feels like recognition, as if we are rediscovering something we once knew, reassembling a puzzle whose image we've seen before in another life, another age. The more we learn about the ancient world, the more it resembles a reflection, a mirror held up by a civilization that may have anticipated our return. In myths across the world, there are stories not only of a flood that destroyed the old order, but of a promise, a vow that one day when the earth had healed, memory would awaken again. The Egyptians spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked among men and built the foundations of knowledge. They also said that after the flood, the wisdom of the first time would sleep until the stars returned to their proper place in the sky. In the Vedic hymns, the world is said to move through cycles called yugas, each ending in destruction and rebirth. The final age, Kali Yuga, is not the end but the forgetting, a long winter of spirit, after which the ancient order returns. Even the Maya, whose calendar was misread as prophecy of apocalypse, spoke not of ending, but of renewal, the completion of one sun and the dawn of another. Perhaps the civilization before the flood was not erased, but encoded. Its monuments, myths, and mathematics may have been messages to the future, preserved in forms that could survive catastrophe. The Great Pyramid, the megaliths of Baalbek, the star temples of Angkor, the Nazca Lines, all might be components of a global archive designed to communicate through time rather than through speech. They were not meant for their contemporaries, they were meant for us. If we look closely, the pattern emerges. These ancient works share not only geometry but intent. Each is built to endure, each speaks through silence, and each, in its own way, teaches the same lesson: that the universe is ordered, that harmony is the key to survival, that knowledge divorced from balance leads to ruin. It is as if the builders foresaw the rise of a future civilization that would rediscover power without wisdom, and tried, in their quiet way, to warn it. What if that future is now? We, the inheritors of their silence, have reached again the threshold they may have crossed. We split the atom, we map the stars, we alter the earth itself. Yet in our acceleration, we have forgotten rhythm. The ancients built with the cosmos, we build against it. They measured time by the heartbeat of the planet. We measure it by profit and progress. Perhaps the flood was not punishment but consequence, the natural result of imbalance. And perhaps, in our age, the earth prepares to teach the same lesson once more. But maybe that was their design, not to curse us but to guide us. If they truly foresaw our return, then their legacy is not tragedy, but trust. They believed that one day, humanity would remember. They left markers not only in stone but in story. Myths of rebirth, archetypes of light emerging from darkness, civilizations sleeping beneath the sea. We dismiss them as allegory, but perhaps they are instructions, a compass for when we lose our way. There is another possibility, quieter, but more unsettling. Perhaps the builders of the old world were not our ancestors, but our descendants. If time is cyclical, then the civilization that came before the flood might also be the one that comes after ours. Maybe they already remember us because they are us. A future humanity reborn after our own forgetting, guided by the relics we leave behind. In that sense, every ruin, every myth, every question we ask is part of a loop. We are both the past and the future, building toward and recovering from the same catastrophe, again and again. It's a humbling thought, that we might live within the memory of a civilization that has already lived, died, and returned. It means that our search for origins is also a search for destiny. The builders we call ancient may have built not only for their time but for all time, ensuring that even when the tide of memory recedes, something remains to guide those who come after. The pyramids, the circles, the myths. They are not monuments to the past, but bridges across eternity. When modern scientists speak of quantum entanglement, the way particles remain connected across vast distances, it echoes something deeply human, the sense that knowledge too is entangled across ages. What one civilization learns, another may rediscover, as if memory itself were woven into the fabric of existence. The lost civilization may not be lost at all. It may live through us, whispering through intuition, through art, through the sense of wonder that keeps us reaching beyond the visible. Even now, as we peer into the cosmos with telescopes that can see back to the dawn of creation, we are performing the same act they once did, mapping the heavens to understand ourselves. Our instruments are newer, but our longing is the same. We are still drawing circles in the dust, still listening for the forgotten chord that once bound heaven and earth. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of the civilization before the flood, not their technology, nor their architecture, but their capacity to remember through beauty. They carved harmony into stone because they knew that one day, long after words had failed, beauty would still speak. Every symmetry, every proportion, every line of sacred geometry was a way of saying, when you see this, you will know us. And maybe we do know them, even if we cannot name them. Maybe we carry their memory in our fascination with ruins, in our ache for meaning, in the way silence feels sacred inside a temple or beneath the stars. Maybe every act of creation is an echo of their remembering, the proof that the cycle continues, that nothing truly dies, it only sleeps. When the flood came, it washed away their cities, but it could not wash away the pattern. It lingers in every atom, every orbit, every dream. And now, as we stand once again at the edge of another turning, a world warming, a tide rising, the circle begins to close. The civilization that remembered us is waiting, not in the past, but in the future we are creating. And one day, when our own monuments crumble into sand, they will find them, and they will know. They will look up at the same stars, breathe the same wind, and whisper what we've always whispered to those who came before. We remember you.